from Fun Club once again, and I wanted to talk to you about, well, I must say the title I came up with in like May, because that was around the time you had to submit proposals, and I was sort of expecting that it would turn out okay and that I could talk about color web fonts, but well, unfortunately, it didn't quite work that way, so I'm going to be actually talking about movies. So, you know, like everybody loves black and white movies, right? And there are some, you know, classical movies that just work in black and white so well, like, you know, Charlie Chaplin, this is Shoulder Arms, or, you know, Harold Lloyd in Safety Last. It just works so great. And, you know, there's so many other black and white movies that work so well. For instance, you know, the great final scene from Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. It just is, you know, this memorable black and white film reel, or, you know, or The Woman in Red by Gene Wilder, you know, a great black and white film. Or, you know, Krzysztof Kieślowski, Three Colors Blue and the Three Colors Red. It's very, very sort of vivid black and white film reels, or maybe not. I mean, I think in some cases, you know, the color version works slightly better. So, okay, and of course, you know, if the Dutch national team plays against Brazil, it's very obvious who's the Oranje, or maybe not. I mean, maybe color helps sometimes. So, okay, enough about movies. But typography is the black art, as we know. And, you know, typographers have, of course, a concept of color. So, you know, this color, right? I mean, or this is typographic color. It's the evenness of gray. And, you know, there never has been anything else that typographers would understand as color. Although, you know, sometimes there were other traces of color still. But, of course, you know, no typography is black and white, and we all know the Gutenberg Bible was printed in black and white, and there was no color whatsoever, just black and white, right? Or, well, yeah, I mean, that's not typography, because that was, you know, handmade, it was written, and of course, but it's just, well, maybe it's even more than two colors sometimes. All right, but this is not typography, right? This color stuff has been hand painted. It has nothing to do with type. Although, I mean, there has been cases where people were actually making, you know, multicolor type. This is in the 1860s, I believe. Nick Sherman might know exactly. And this was, you know, chromatic type, and the Hamilton Wood Type Museum and P22 have teamed up and actually created a font that, or a series of fonts that is able to sort of emulate these layers that you would go when printing chromatically. So we'd actually print one run in one color and then print again the other color and make sure the colors the printing matched. So this is available on my fonts. These so-called layered or chromatic or multi-layered fonts, and it's very nice. You know, you can do things like that. It's possible on the web. You use a bunch of tricks. You use you know, some CSS, and you sort of repeat certain elements. And it's drawn, you know, using, as I think Richard Hegler described it, sort of drawing these layers using the same metrics and some technical goggle bock, or I don't know the word he used. I never remember it. But this is, you know, you would basically make these separate fonts and make sure that they all matched, and then the user would combine them. And yes, and there are tutorials how to make these sort of multiple, or excuse me, single layered fonts how to combine them using CSS into these stacks. So you have an element with the same text that is rendered with one font, and then on top of it, it's rendered again using the other font, and you can specify. It's not very complicated. It's actually fairly easy, but still a bit of a workaround. Well, fortunately, I'm going to show bits of TransType first and show how the same CSS effect can be sort of combined and then sort of frozen into the font, and then I'll tell you a few words about how it actually can be used, how these fonts that a tool such as TransType might produce could be used. So let's have a look. So this is TransType. It's almost released. It's going to be sort of out, I think, in a few days, or maybe tomorrow or something like that, on fontline.com, I hope. This is where you would open, the 3-layered fonts, and TransType has this effect called overlay fonts, where you can essentially, you can use this dialog box to specify the stacking order. So you can drag and drop the layered fonts into the order you want them to appear, and then for every layer you can specify a color and transparency using either sort of like using the color picker, or RGB, red, comma, green, comma, blue, comma, transparency value, or using this hex notation for RGB, and then after the semicolon the transparency value. So it's fairly simple. You can define the colors and the transparency values for each layer, just as you would in CSS, and then TransType will produce something. Okay, this is pre-recorded demo, just because I didn't want to waste time. Okay, so we have this new thing, which is sort of supposedly a font. It now only lives within TransType, and it has color, and you can give it a family name, style name, the same naming fields that you can control generally within TransType for any regular fonts. So yes, styling group versus family. Styling group is the sort of Windows family name. We came up with this name. So styling group is the one that is used by old Windows GDI applications, if you know what I'm talking about. The whole family naming stuff has been, as we all know, a bit difficult. Not with TransType 4 anymore, fortunately. So now you hit on convert, and you get you generate some fonts. It takes a while, and then what we get is, if the font was a colored font, we actually get several files. So we get we get several TTFs. One of them is just sort of an auto-traced combined version, which isn't really very useful for that particular one. And then we have a font that is called SBix, and SBix.ttf, and that's actually a font that can be used in macOS 10.7 or 10.8 natively. So I can install it, and I can all the color glyphs are there. I can run text edit, or I could use Safari on these OSs. Okay, it's a bit. Oh yeah, vote often. That was the sentence that was on the original poster from Hannover Museum. And yeah, and if I change the font, I have the colored glyphs right here, and it just behaves like a regular font because it is a regular font. It's an OpenType font. It can have OpenType layout features. It can have pretty much all information that a regular OpenType font would have, except that the glyphs are multicolored. So then let's have a look at the other. So one was the SPIX, and the other one, which I'm going to use Firefox nightly build, which is like Firefox 27. I'm going to use this Pablo Impalari's testing page, which is a great sort of page where you can drag and drop fonts and actually have an OpenType features panel and a bunch of sort of predefined samples. And I'm going to drag drop the SVG font that Transtype gave me, and it is color there as well. So in Firefox, I actually use the SVG one, and I'm going to explain in a second why these differences. And and this works. I'm not sure whether already by default in the newest Firefox it's on by default. I believe it is, but there is this one option called it can be controlled in about config. If it's set to true, which is now I believe the default value, then it means that the SVG font is enabled. If I set it to false, then the glyphs will render, the regular black and white glyphs will render, which are also included in the font. But if I set it to true, then the SVG glyphs will be rendered. So there are two sets of glyphs in these fonts. In the glyph table, the traditional TrueType table, there are black and white glyphs, and in an SVG table, there are colored glyphs. So we know that traditional font formats inside of OpenType, inside of the TTF or OTF container, we could have black and white glyphs in one of two tables or formats. One was the glyph table, which had the TrueType outlines, and it's been invented, defined by Apple in the TrueType spec. And then the PostScript outlines, also black and white, could live in the CFF table defined by Adobe. And then this year, or in the last few years, but actually this year specifically, a bunch of proposals for storing colored glyph information have been proposed by different companies. So the SPIX table, proposed by Apple actually already a few years ago, it uses bitmaps. It basically uses PNG files that can be, multicolored with transparency, and they have one or more master sizes. And then, of course, if the master size is, let's say, 200 ppm, then everything, all the sizes smaller than that, it will be sort of, subsampled, so the quality will be pretty good. Or if there are multiple master sizes, then the closest one will be used. And for sizes larger than that, it will be like enlarging bitmaps. So of course you will have, some blurring, but then it's bitmaps, so you can do things with bitmaps that you cannot do with vectors and vice versa. Google has proposed two table formats as well. Not going to talk about them now in much detail. Microsoft has proposed two tables, color and CPAL, which are purely vector-based, and they allow you to have sort of multiple solid colors. So you can have elements of glyph that are blue or red or green. That's pretty much it, or the whole palette, but without any fancy effects, but with multiple color palettes. It's also a very interesting proposal. And then Adobe and Mozilla have actually proposed to put SVG into OpenType. And SVG allows you to use vector glyph information and bitmap glyph information. Actually, the vector glyph information can be very complex. It can use, some complex fills, gradients, etc. So there are these proposals, and right now their support is sort of spotty. So the glyph and CFF, of course, work everywhere, and then the SPIX table works in applications, in certain applications on macOS 10.7 and newer and iOS, but only on applications that use Apple's own text renderer. And then the Google tables work in the newest versions of FreeType, Microsoft Color and CPAL work in Windows 8.1, the most recent one in applications such as Internet Explorer 11. And then SVG works in Firefox 26 and newer, I believe. And of course, people are, support is being added. So if you're interested in more details about these different formats, I've written up an article on our new FontLab blog that we've launched last week, and it's quite technical, it's quite detailed, but it has all the links and all the information, and I'll try to keep it up to date as more information becomes available. So now, just very briefly as well, the things that I've shown before, the wood type layered fonts, they were obviously vector fonts, but it's also possible to create, BigMap fonts that then, give you very different results. I'm gonna skip that and just show you a few. So this is obviously a vector layered font, blue. It's available on my fonts. So this one, can exist in a Microsoft Color format, because that's pure vectors with simple fills, or in SVG. And it can also exist in SBIX, because it can be rasterized into bitmaps, and then the Apple format will support it as well. And then there's another one, Atletico, also layered, and then converted using transtype into Color, SVG, and SBIX. Circus is another layered font that can be made into these vector and bitmap formats. But then there are examples like this, or this. Ringo Blingo is sort of an upcoming free font as a companion to a typeface family called Ringo that will be a traditional one, but this one is basically a pure bitmap implementation, so it can work using SBIX on Apple and using SVG, but will not work on using the Microsoft vector-based color format, because it's just too complex. The Microsoft Color format just deals with sort of simple fills and vector sort of subshapes. And just very briefly, FontLab had a companion app. So all these formats, have their own native environments where they work. But we at FontLab, we decided to sort of make it easier for people. So we're going to be releasing this very simple, free application for Mac and Windows that will read all these font formats, regardless whether it's the Microsoft format or the Apple or the Google or the Adobe Mozilla, and you'll be able to work something like this way. So imagine you have Photoshop, you launch FontLab Pad, just a little tiny thing. You add a font, you typeset some text, and then you can actually switch off the background or set the transparent background, and then you sort of see how it will work in a context of other artwork that you're producing. And then you just say save as a PDF, SVG, or PNG, whatever is most appropriate, and then import it into your app, drag and drop into Photoshop. It's kind of a little bit of a workaround, but it's good for headlines. It's not great for longer texts, but it's a very simple way to get these to work with these fonts for users, and it's going to be a free app. So if you produce these fonts in these formats, you can point users to FontLab Pad, and they can just sort of use it simply everywhere on all Windows and Mac apps. And then on the ones that support them natively, of course, that will be better. But if you want to use it with Photoshop or InDesign that doesn't yet support any of these, FontLab Pad might be the solution. So yes, so sometimes black and white is a great choice, and that's been for type designers and typographers for a long time. But maybe sometimes, color is the better one, or, maybe black and white and color, I don't know, that's, or even, black and white and color. Okay, that's... Oh, and by the way, of course, the Victoria app, or the next generation font editing that we were showing, of course it allows you to open and edit the color fonts in all these formats. This is just a screenshot showing that, you know, it has layers, black and colored, and you can, you know, draw and produce them not like in FontLab Studio, sort of layer by layer, but actually using real multicolor drawing interface. And that's pretty much it. Thank you. And if you have questions, again,